Hi all, it's Daniel. Today I wanted to go over some of the differences that make Subaru special and the reason for choosing Subaru. We have a display model right here. It goes over the basics of what makes Subaru special. This is kind of like the meat and potatoes of what makes the Subaru brand different, the mechanicals of it, so let's go over it. Alright, so as you can see right here, we have the architecture of any gasoline-powered Subaru. I believe this applies to the hybrids as well. And so, as you can see right off the bat, we talk about Subaru symmetrical all-wheel drive. Now, what does that mean? Symmetrical meaning that every linkage here is completely the same across the center line. It's a mirror image of the right and left side. And that's possible due to the Boxer engine that we have sitting right here. Boxer engines have less moving parts than traditional inline-4 engines. And let me just bring up a non-Boxer engine right here. So this is what you'll find in, let's say, a Civic or a Toyota Corolla. And most 4-cylinder engines will be just like this. So it will be 4 cylinders striking up and down and mounted like this, mounted on the side. Ideally, this engine should be mounted longitudinally, but it can't be because then it would be too high for the bonnet, for the hood, and it would kind of protrude out. So manufacturers put them onto their side, and then they inevitably have to put more gears here to drive that power to the front wheels and the rear wheels as well, if it's an all-wheel drive car. One of the disadvantages you can see right here are quite clear. First, this is not a symmetrical design, and one of the linkages will always be smaller than the others. So you can see one here is shorter than the other three, and that of course affects the articulation of the suspension. Now you cannot. Now you have a limiting factor in terms of the suspension going up and down. So this doesn't allow for what the car could have had in terms of suspension articulation if it had a symmetrical design like Subaru's. So with Subaru, you can see that each linkage here is the same length, which means that now the car has more potential articulation up and down, and that lends Subaru to be able to have more ground clearance. That's one of the reasons that Subaru has 8.7 inches of ground clearance, which is industry leading and quite a bit more generous than some of the other competition. For example, a Subaru Crosstrek or Subaru Forester would have 8.7 inches of ground clearance versus something like a RAV4 or a Honda CR-V, which would have less ground clearance than that. So that's one difference. So symmetrical all-wheel drive versus non-symmetry with a shorter linkage. Another thing that you'll see is because of the symmetry, this is completely balanced. So it's a near perfect balance versus the other model right here. You can clearly see it's not balanced as well as the Subaru. So this would apply to a 4-cylinder car. I don't want to take away from the 6-cylinder design. A V6 design still would be symmetrical. But of course, there's fuel economy implications there with the V6. So, other than the symmetry and the balance from side to side, the other thing to note is the lower center of gravity. As you can see, all the weight is way low in the chassis, and that allows the car to have less body roll side to side when you're going around the turn because most of the weight is at the bottom. Now let's compare it with, let's say, the engine in a Civic or a Corolla. So I can feel it in my hand right here that the center of gravity is higher. You can actually see it visually. And so as this diagram shows, when you're going around the corner side to side, because the mass is higher up, you're going to have more body roll going side to side. The last advantage with the Subaru Boxer engine is other than fewer components than this type of an engine, so it's a bit more efficient from that perspective. The engine itself is also a bit more compact, and because of that, because of its flatness, it can actually disengage from the drivetrain and be forced below the passenger compartment in the case of a frontal collision. Right here you can see what I'm talking about. If there is an accident and the engine gets pushed, it will actually be pushed under the cabin as opposed to potentially intruding inside the cabin. So that's that. That's in a nutshell what makes Subaru great and the reason to choose Subaru with its symmetrical all-wheel drive. So thanks guys, hope you enjoyed it, and see you in the next one.